Welcome back to the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com. It is a Monday, March the 11th, 2024. It is time once again for a recruiting roundup. And we've got quad box recruiting coverage for you this morning. Right there, you see Joseph Hastings does an outstanding job covering Alabama recruiting for us at BOL. And of course, the old dudes down there. You got Andrew Bone, senior recruiting editor for BamaOnLine.com, and of course, site publisher, Diagonal down there to me, Mr. Tim Watts. And Tim, I guess no shortage of topics. A busy weekend as we sort of anticipated for Alabama on the recruiting trail. And I guess it was a lank kind of stretch here, guys. Let all naysayers know, maybe, if you're Kalen DeBoer on the recruiting front.
Yeah, I mean, if you were wondering what it was going to be like recruiting under Kalen DeBoer, I mean, a lot of people predicted correctly it's going to be different. I don't remember. I don't think Andrew. We were discussing it. I don't remember this many kids. I don't know if it approached 100, but it certainly seemed like it in the very first week of spring practice. And not only just did they come and everything went well, they got a lot of one-on-one time with the coaches, so a lot of energy, and the feedback has been really good. It's definitely a different week from the team standpoint and the recruiting standpoint. So that much is true, but it's also, I think it was going to be very productive, and they showed they got a little bit of knowledge on how to recruit.
Andrew, you previewed this for us at BamaOnline.com, the anticipated crush of visitors that we were anticipating for that first week of spring practice into the weekend. Did it meet and or exceed your expectations now in retrospect?
Yeah, I think it certainly exceeded the expectations because usually when you have a list of players that are going to be coming in, a lot of times some of those guys cancel, end up going elsewhere. They, had family plans that fell through. You don't always get all those kids on campus, but for Alabama this past week, they were able to get probably 95% of the kids that we had listed as visitors on campus this past weekend, this past week. So it was a pretty remarkable group overall. I think looking at it, there were a few surprises. You had Javion Hilson, who's a former Alabama commit, flip from Alabama to FSU, I think the day of or the day after Nick Saban retired. So being able to get Javion Hilson back on campus was pretty significant, as well as Zion Grady, who is also a former Alabama commit. I'm going to let some of the other guys talk about some of the other players that were in town, but it was a overall great trip. I mean, great week. Juju Lewis was in town, and a lot of other big names.
Joseph Hastings, we heard on Saturday afternoon from Zamir Smith, the do it everything athlete out of the state of Maryland, 5'10, 170 pounds, commits to the Alabama Crimson Tide. I know you were able to get comments from Zamir and just sort of his reaction and what went into that decision.
I thought it was really interesting because Zamir was talking a lot about some of the common themes that we've heard from visitors, not only this past week, but also at the end of January that have gone to Alabama, been under Kalen DeBoer's program and their visitors list. And pretty much what he was saying is that all the recruiting personnel, whether it was on-field coaches, off-field coaches, Coach DeBoer himself, were prioritizing him, making sure to keep in touch with him throughout the entire visit. There was always someone by him throughout his entire stay on campus. He was in town on Thursday and Friday. So that was one thing that really stood out to him, was just the love shown to him. Also, the intensity at practice. That's another thing that we heard this past week when talking with visitors, is just how intense it is, how the culture hasn't changed at Alabama, how competitive the practice was. So that's something that also stood out to him. And he said that as soon as he got on campus, was around the coaches, got to see the practice, he knew he was going to be a Bama boy. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Rico Scott commitment last year, just in terms of, a product from the Northeast coming down, visiting, and then committing pretty much right away, knowing immediately that Alabama was going to be their future home. And Zamir told us that, he doesn't plan on taking any more visits, wants to return to Alabama as much as he can, including for an official visit in June. So Bama knocked it out the park with that visit, and then also adding him to the fold a day later.
Yeah, Tim, with Zamir Smith, it also is another indication of how conceptually things might change with Alabama on offense, on defense, because Zamir Smith, 5'10, 170 pounds, You talk about critical factors at the corner position with the previous regime. It seemed like for Nick Saban, it started right around 6 foot for corners, probably around 175, 180 pounds, but a different defense going in. We talked about this on the Smith commitment breakdown video. This is a guy that can play with his eyes to the quarterback on defense and just a real playmaker that can impact things in a couple different ways, and not necessarily a guy who would maybe fit the previous regime, but seems to fit this one just fine.
Yeah, Nick Saban and them were ultra picky when it came to defensive backs. I mean, they had to, especially when you had Kirby and Pruitt there, because those are DB coaches. You got Nick Saban's a DB coach, so those were DB coordinators, a DB head coach, and then you had a defensive back somewhere in there. So extremely picky to get those guys through. Had a high hit rate, obviously some really talented guys, but at the same time, there was never really didn't seem to be a particularly deep room. You'd have a guy come in and locking down the starting position 2 to 3 years, Marlon Dre, all those guys, and then moving on. So, but yeah, I think this is different because there's more safeties. There's almost a new position. It's like a hybrid corner safety. I mean, we don't know with a lot of these guys. We talked about Terry Arnold coming out of high school. He can play a lot of positions. All these guys are looking at her that way right now. And I think Zamir kind of referred to that in for Kane Womack would be a field corner, field safety, a guy basically, it's almost like, to me, it's almost like a rover in softball, a guy that just moves around where there's a weak spot, doubling up on the guy, and a playmaker.
Andrew, it also sparked sort of this sentiment that there could be a crimson wave of commitments on the not too distant horizon. Do you subscribe to that thought, or is that maybe some of what you're hearing? We're doing this show live, by the way, on a Monday morning. So we are on commitment alert as we do this, right?
We're always on commitment alert. It always happens whenever you least expect it. So if a commitment broke during the middle of this show, no surprise. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But yeah, I think that on Friday night we posted on the BOL Roundtable a few nuggets. We mentioned a few guys that we felt like Alabama was really trending for at the time. One was Zamir Smith, who the following day announced his commitment to Alabama. There's another guy that has set a commitment date, and that is Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson has a commitment date of March the 20th. He just came back from a trip to Tuscaloosa last week on Wednesday, then spent 3 days at Texas A&M. And the announcement regarding his commitment date happened shortly after that. But I don't think there's any reflection as to which way he's leaning as far as coming off that Texas A&M visit. I think Alabama has done a really good job there, has made sure that he's felt like a top priority. He is still, as of right now, going to visit Georgia, I believe next week before making that decision. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that, but that could be one of the next ones. And I think there's a couple other guys that could be very close to pulling the trigger. We've seen some predictions roll in that we've made on Derek Smith out of Southside High School in Selma. Luke Metz, who's a linebacker out of Georgia, is another guy who received an offer last week. That's somebody that we're going to be watching here pretty closely over the next month or so. But yeah, I mean, this is I think this is the start of something that, is going to be pretty busy this spring. The last few years, we saw Alabama really kind of be patient, wait, take commitments during the summer. I think we're going to see a lot of commitments during the spring.
As we get ready to shift back to Tim Watts here, I want to remind you, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel here for BamaOnLine.com, we would certainly encourage you to do that. Hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, hit a like for the program if you don't mind. You'll get all of our video content as it drops right here on the YouTube home for BOL. So, Tim, when we think about the quarterback position, because we can't go too long without talking about that spot, I guess it was interesting over the last 3 or 4 days, too, with Juju Lewis in town. Sounds like there is still some considerable interest in another target or two at the quarterback position, even if both of those guys are committed elsewhere at this moment. What did we learn from the last few days in terms of that position for 2025?
Well, I think we already knew Juju Lewis was the top prospect they were looking at, top quarterback target. Obviously, one of the most talented guys in his class, high profile, committed to USC. Georgia's got the full court press on him. What we learned for Alabama's sake, well, he's familiar with the campus. He's been there before. There's none of that's anything new. This was just a meet and greet with the coaches. He must have talked to him and liked him enough to show up for a couple of days. But also, I think for a quarterback, you really want to see that offense, right? You really want to see what Jalen Milroe is going to do, all the quarterbacks are going to do, the routes being ran, how Justice Haynes is going to be showcased. And, and that hidden element, I think, is Caleb Oden, right? Caleb's not only in the system, he's doing really well in the system. So when Juju asked Caleb how he likes it, he's probably getting some glowing reviews. So, I think it was a good trip all around to meet the coaches, see the offense, see an old teammate, and all of that. But there's a long way to go with Juju. Obviously he committed early, and there's still a lot of recruiting left to be done.
Joseph, speaking of Caleb's that are pretty good sized targets, there's another one over in Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
For the 2025 cycle. I know you had a chance to catch up with Caleb Cunningham, a 5-star receiver. Sounds like Alabama's in pretty good shape on that front as well.
Yeah, so I thought it was actually really interesting because Caleb told us after visiting on Wednesday, he said that he didn't want to leave. He was enjoying his time on campus so much. And then Zamir Smith said a few days later that pretty much the exact same quote, he didn't want to leave. So once again, another common thread there between those, just those visitors. But with Caleb Cunningham, obviously he was someone that had high interest in Alabama prior to the staff change, visited Tuscaloosa multiple times in 2023, and was honestly on the fence about putting Alabama in his top 12 in late January. But it was a school stop from Jamarcus Shepard in late January, a few days prior to him releasing his top schools list, that ended up putting the Crimson Tide in that top 12. He lined up a visit. It was the second visit that he took following the dead period, which is, it's always interesting to see how many prospects get on campus and which prospects get on campus after that dead period ends, that month-long dead period ends. And he was there on Wednesday, enjoyed his time with Shepard, really likes his coaching style, is a fan of the offense, and what Jalen Polk and Romo Dunze were able to do last season. He has really high interest in Alabama, says that they have a big percentage chance of getting him. Looking to line up an official visit date to Bama, likely going to take place in the summer. He has a pretty jam-packed couple months coming up here of unofficials. So it'd be interesting to see where exactly he takes those officials to. But Alabama is definitely in good spot here. You got Ryan Williams, who was recruiting him prior, will probably still be in his ear, in the coming weeks. That relationship with Jamarcus Shepard could not have gotten off to a better start. And there were a lot of questions about, Alabama in February, just what was going to happen, during the dead period, new offers, evaluation, things of that nature. It really seems like it was a good time for Alabama to build those relationships, work the phones a little bit, and, set up those visits. And Caleb Cunningham was one of the bigger ones last week.
Yeah, Andrew, I don't think any of us anticipated wide receiver recruitment being a problem for this staff, given the previous production at stops that Kalen DeBoer and Jamarcus Shepard have made. You talk about Derek Smith, the number 2 player in the state of Alabama per On3 for the 2025 cycle. I guess he could play anywhere on the field, perhaps wide receiver. But even with Cunningham and some other guys, it looks like that expectation is going to come to fruition.
You see the talent that keeps on coming through Tuscaloosa, especially the first week of fall practice, or excuse me, spring practice. We saw, I think, 4 top 100 wide receivers, including a 5-star in Caleb Cunningham, on campus in the last week. You're going to see more kind of throughout the spring, throughout the summer. And speaking of summer, we're not even to summer yet. So, there could be some guys that emerge in summer camp that they potentially like even better than the guys that they're recruiting right now. So right now, it's all about building relationships, evaluating. The coaches are on spring break this week, but I guarantee you that we're going to see some offers that get extended, because there's going to be a lot of film watching, whether these coaches are down at the beach or just sitting at home getting adjusted to new life in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, Tim, we don't want to get too caught up, I guess, in the offensive side of the ball, although it's very easy when you consider the quarterback prospects that Alabama is very much in the mix for, the wide receivers that we just talked about. So defensively, big, I would think, to add Antonio Coleman Jr. back to the fold here recently. Zamir Smith anticipated to play a corner position, and looks like some linebackers also in this mix. We heard Andrew talk earlier about Luke Metz from over in the state of Georgia. a lot of stuff that we had in our nuggets yesterday on the roundtable at BamaOnline.com kind of reports to maybe linebacker prospects both near and far. Duke Johnson, a guy that can fit that mold. Noah McHale from the state of California, I guess, also in that sort of department.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you like about this, and there's not a direct answer to a lot of these commitments of where they're going to play. That's kind of what I like. I mean, we have a feel for we think they're going to play, but they have options to play otherwhere. I mean, Duke Johnson, Daryl Johnson's another one that could play, any linebacker position. We saw him going off the edge, good running back at the high school level. He does all that stuff, a very athletic guy, highly recruited. I mean, that's the same thing with Zamir and Derek Smith. Guys' names you keep hearing. I mean, you can place them all over the field. I mean, certainly Zamir is a really good special teams guy. I mean, he averaged 40 yards of punt return and 40 yards of reception, right? So, I mean, this is a guy who on defense is going to end up being instant offense. So I think when you look at that, I see a lot of the focus kind of is on offense, but I think slowly but surely we're going to see defense because Kane Womack, he's got a type. He's like a single man in his 20s. He's got a preference on what he's going to recruit. And he knows what he wants. And, Luke Metz is a classic example of a guy they feel can, hit multiple roles.
Joseph, you've talked to some of these guys on the defensive side here in recent days.
Joseph had technical difficulties.
Okay, there we go. I think he's ready to rejoin. There he is. Joseph Hastings back with us.
We thought Joseph quit. He's had enough of hearing me and Andrew run our mouth. Joseph, I had enough.
Joseph, we were talking about defensive guys that Alabama is very much in it for. I know you've talked with a handful of those prospects here in recent days. A couple of edges, London Merritt of IMG recently transferred down to Bradenton, I guess for his senior season. We heard the talk about Javian Hilson earlier from Andrew Bone, also a Florida guy from Cocoa. Give us a little bit of your thoughts on the conversations you've had with Merritt, Odom, Hilson, in terms of, the true interest that they have in this Alabama defense.
Definitely. And also mentioned Noah McHale, too, linebacker out of California. He's somebody that the previous staff was recruiting as well. Visited Alabama a couple times in 2023 and returned this past week. Enjoyed his time on campus. One thing, that common thread amongst those interviews that I got to conduct over the past few days was just the intensity at practice. They really enjoyed the position groups that they were able to watch, whether that was Christian Robinson for Javion Hilson, Freddie Roach for London Merritt, Kane Womack for Noah McHale. Just really enjoyed watching those guys get after it in practice and the intensity and competitive level, for the Crimson Tide there. All have pretty much mentioned a possibility of taking an official visit to Alabama. Trajan Oden's trying to fit that into his schedule right now. We'll see if he lines that up, but all expressed high interest in the Crimson Tide and just that 4-2-5 defense, how versatile it is. The opportunities for mismatches that can be created one-on-ones. They were really high on it, and the possibilities seem endless in that defensive scheme for them.
Andrew, you've also indicated that Coach Cap, working with that offensive line now, has made some major strides here in the last few days in terms of 5-star offensive line types that could be very much interested in Alabama moving forward, or maybe had been prior to.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now is getting a lot of these kids on campus, which we've seen several of them set visits over the course of the last couple of weeks. Coach Cap, came in and replaced Scott Huff, who left for the Seattle Seahawks. About called them Seattle Mariners, but the Seattle Seahawks job. And he's building a lot of fast relationships. I thought it was impressive that what's his name, David Sanders, 5-star offensive tackle out of North Carolina, continues to have Alabama in his top 6 and has already scheduled a trip back to Tuscaloosa. I don't know. I had a little bit of a feeling that Alabama might not make that top 6 just because the relationship was with the previous staff, was with Eric Wolford. But there's still a lot of love there for Alabama. He's going to be coming in on March 23rd. We just saw that Ty Haywood, who's another 5-star offensive lineman, has set an official visit for late May to Alabama. They've been in contact with a lot of other guys. Andrew Babaloa out of Kansas. You have Jackson Lloyd out of California, who the previous staff recruited at Washington. He's already been to Tuscaloosa. We should see him back at Alabama. Micah DeBoer, who's an in-state offensive lineman from Viger, is going to be visiting in early April. A lot of big visits coming up on the offensive line front. We're going to see we didn't really see many guys on campus last week as far as major offensive line targets. There was a few guys, but we're going to start seeing a lot more in the coming weeks and leading up to the 8A game. So be interesting to see how Coach Cap's able to put this class together, because there's no offensive line commitments right now, but I do see them signing maybe around 4 or 5 guys.
Real quick, Travis, one of the things here with the offensive line we got to remember is the change probably in philosophy. So you had Bama staff recruiting a lot of kids. I mean, obviously the tackles played in that 340-plus range. Not so much. I mean, obviously Washington had big kids. Their offensive lineman getting drafted was 310-plus. He's a big guy. But I think the philosophy, plus you had the last coach basically added, was the offensive line coach. So he's getting in there doing his evals. So that could have slowed it down a little bit. But it was a good point that you didn't see a lot on campus this week, but I bet you'll see it when they get back from spring break.
Tim, I know you cover these guys as prospects. Now you do it as transfer targets. Alabama had 3 practices last week. Give me a guy or two that you were most anticipating hitting the practice field for Alabama and getting that going with the Crimson Tide. An offensive guy, maybe a defensive guy, and just kind of thinking about the impact that player could make. And sometimes it involves positions, right? You go from a staff to another staff, and as we talked about before, you're not exactly sure how this guy is now going to fit in. Did you have a question or two or a player or two that you maybe got some of those answers about? Understanding it's just 3 practices. We're not in full pad work yet, but still a lot of fun.
For me, I feel like I'm cheating on my wife, because I always, when those practices came out, I wanted to see the true freshman more than anybody else on that campus. I wanted to see the true freshman. But now I feel like, I've got my side bay, and it's the transfer guys, right?
Oh,
I mean, Damani Jackson, I was super excited to see him. Quick twitch, you know what I mean? Most people we call quick twitch. We're going to come up with another name, because dude moves in a hurry. Smooth, very smooth, very quick, very explosive in all his drills. And of course, I wanted to see Austin Mack, because I'm pretty sure he's like a cyborg.
He looks like a cell phone tower out there.
Seriously, that's not a normal when you're in the quarterback group, and that dude is so much bigger. It's crazy. But I was excited. I was excited to see them. But from an impact guy, Jeremy would be my offensive guy. So Damani, obviously Keon Saab, but I was most excited to see Damani and Jeremy, because of everything I'd heard and knew and about their potential and their role next year, possibly.
What about you, Andrew?
I think Caleb Odom. I think with Caleb Odom switching over to wide receiver, we had heard a lot of chatter even before it kind of went public that Odom was really impressing during the Rose Bowl practices. He was one of the, I think, 2 or 3 guys that continued to stand out each day. And then all the players started talking about him, and then, carried that over with this new staff and switching positions. And you continue to hear how well he's doing out there, how well he's picking things up, and being a 6'5", 220-pound wide receiver on the outside. That's it's pretty rare for Alabama. We hadn't seen that in several years. I think the last player that was even over 6'5" that got recruited was Tyrell Shavers in that 2017 recruiting class, which that group turned out pretty decent. Tyrell didn't stick with Alabama, but I think the other 3 guys ended up getting drafted in the first round. So it's a pretty good class. So be interesting to see a 6'5" wide receiver out there on the outside.
What about you, JoJo?
I think I'm going to go with Parker Burlsford. I'm really interested in seeing what the interior of the offense. He's got Jaden Roberts, Tyler Booker, potential. Oh, out already? Okay, no. Sorry, my connection keeps on going in and out. But yeah,
Come on,
I'm really
Tim.
excited.
We got to get him off dial-up.
This kid a minute ago, he was a technical wizard. That was you, Travis.
Go ahead while we got you, JoJo. Hit it.
How fast?
Yeah, people are saying I'm hitting the transfer portal. Chris said that he thought I hit the transfer portal, so that's too funny. But I'm really interested in seeing that interior of the offensive line with Tyler Booker, Jaden Roberts, potentially Parker Brailsford there at the center spot. And it's going to be really interesting to see what that group looks like. And then you pair that with a running backs like Justice Haynes and Jam Miller and others, Richard Young. And it's very exciting to see what Alabama's run game can look like, because we talk a lot about the 2 1,000-yard receivers there, what Michael Penix was able to do at Washington, but they had a 1,000-yard rusher in Dylan Johnson. So I think that's a kind of a sneaky aspect of Alabama's offense that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, and what I like too is DeBoer and this staff haven't just put their guys right at the top of the depth chart. I mean, Parker Brailsford, for the first week anyway, was working behind James Brockermeyer. Jeremy Bernard is in that same group with Kendrick Law. So that's legit competition. Kendrick Law ain't giving up nothing to nobody. And there's also ways that both the interior offensive line and at wide receiver, if you got 2 guys that are just that good, you get them on the field together. So there's possibilities that way as well. So Tim, what's most important right now? Understanding it's spring break, but there's still a lot that can be going on. Is it commitment watch that's intensified right now? Is it thinking ahead to the coming weeks? What do you got at the top of the most important list?
Yeah, I think, obviously they'll get a break and the players will get a break. We had a little discussion yesterday about what the players do. And, obviously the coaches go and take trips with their families and all that good stuff. I mean, for me, I think it's just important to remember I think the most important thing is to keep their momentum. I mean, obviously the feedback from these trips, I mean, everything was good. Like Andrew and Joseph referred to, we had most of the visitors. The ones we didn't have were surprise visitors, guys that showed up later in the week. So they were actually able to get the majority of their targets, plus some guys they worked all week. And hey, when this is part of recruiting, is getting them on campus, right? Because you had LSU had a bunch of people, on campus. When Alabama comes back, I think Georgia will be going. So you're trying to recruit them and get them on your campus. So I think for me, it's perspective. I think for them to keep that momentum. And again, it's like the official visits. You see officials visits in June under the Saban era that paid off in November because they went so well. It's important to get that first look and set that tone, which I think Kalen DeBoer and his staff has done a really good job. They say, all the cliches about first impressions. I think they're really good at first impressions.
Andrew, you talked earlier about sort of that immediate reaction to Nick Saban's retirement and how a guy like Hilson didn't waste really any time in making a switch from Alabama to another place. Is that sort of conduit that's being worked to sort of regain the guys like Hilson, but also from the in-state approach? We've seen more of that with Coleman of late. But a guy like Naeem Offord, I know that Alabama hosted that trio from Parker High School last week. And Offord, of course, is already committed to Ohio State, one of the top cornerback prospects in the country for 2025. How is that working right now?
Yeah, I think when the new staff arrived, they wanted to look at the guys that Alabama had previously had commitments from or had offered, but at the end of the day, they were going to make their own decisions. They were going to evaluate. They were going to extend offers. I mean, we saw a lot of players that were reoffered, but we also saw a lot of players who were not reoffered by this new staff, at least not yet. So they're going to be evaluated throughout the spring and summer. You have a really good in-state class right now in the state of Alabama. Offord right now is the number 1 player in the state, followed by Derek Smith. Is Alabama going to be able to get Offord on campus for an official visit? They were able to get him on campus last Wednesday for an unofficial. Came down with a few teammates, saw a former teammate in Jeremiah Beeman. But as of right now, still pretty solid with his commitment to Ohio State. So we'll see how that relationship develops over these next few months leading into summer official visits, if they can get him back on campus. But it's been a lot of positive momentum. But at the same time, it was the very first week. Players were out on the road. They went to practices. They saw something they like. They're going to be going to a lot of different schools over these next couple weeks, couple months, and then start trying to figure out which schools they want to officially visit. So as long as you get one of those official visits, you're going to be in the running, and it seems like Alabama's going to get a lot of officials this summer.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel here for BamaOnLine.com. If you haven't subscribed as of yet, we would certainly appreciate you doing so. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of our YouTube content as it drops right here on the YouTube home for BOL. And of course, if you want to know everything these guys know as they know it, then you need to be with us at BamaOnline.com. Come hang out on the roundtable or premium message board there at BOL. Tim Watts, that's the hot corner for Alabama football and football recruiting, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of news. I mean, especially, at night, you get a lot of offers, news breaking, the feedback. We were watching a lot of guys because, again, it was like a first date. I mean, you had people that had talked on the phone to the Alabama coaches, Kalen DeBoer or an assistant coach. So they knew they had that relationship, but some of them had never been to Tuscaloosa. Some of them weren't that familiar with everything else. So when you get them on campus again, it's almost like speed dating. You got 100, you got 20 plus kids, very highly recruited on campus Friday. And that's your concern, right? And I think with Alabama under Nick Saban, it was a concern to have too many kids at once because it's hard to handle that much, right? And, Nick Saban really just wanted to coach, because, he's between the hashes. He's got the whistle. He's got the hat. He's ready to coach. So the time was limited. But this staff has done a really good job of balancing both. I mean, obviously, they know how to handle Courtney Morgan, all the off-field people. There are so many that have been there before Alabama, Bob Welton and some of those guys. And then now the people they've added and brought in, they know how to get them on campus, take care of them, and let them, line them up to watch film. We haven't heard a single complaint, and it's not hard to hear a single complaint. Me and Andrew could tell you stories about kids coming in for a big game like LSU, and then they're mad because they didn't get any time with Nick Saban after the game. We heard that a lot, actually, in the 9-6 loss that year, 2011. And we're like, yeah, I don't know if he was ready to sit down and, play gin rummy with you at that moment. That's a pretty tough game. So plus that, so it's hard to balance that, but I think they've done a fantastic job. One thing to note, like on a kid like Alford, it's not like Alabama was leading for this guy. He wasn't a Bama lock when Nick Saban was here. It was a battle. It was a deep battle from day one, and I think that battle's continuing.
So, Andrew, that was, Joseph, that was something I was going to ask you. Just sort of, you talk with so many of these guys in retrospect and in the wake of their visits. How different has that been, the conversations, and just with the change in approach, whether it's in practice stuff or the staff that has changed over both on the field and off the field, which is a big, big part of what this Kalen DeBoer regime is going to be about?
To be honest, Travis, I really didn't notice too much of a difference just in terms of post-visit interviews now with Kalen DeBoer at the helm versus Nick Saban last year. The biggest thing that I really did kind of take away, though, is just how much of an emphasis there's been on all the recruiting personnel. I mentioned it earlier, on all of them, on-field, off-field coaches, assistants, recruiting staff members, people within the facilities, just being able to be around visitors throughout their entire visit, make sure that they're known that they're a priority. A couple visitors like Duke Johnson, Caleb Cunningham mentioned that as soon as they got on campus, they were greeted by multiple coaches and staff members. They were given the red carpet treatment. So that was one thing that I really kind of took away. But in terms of the structure of the program, the culture, how things are run, how tight of a ship it is, just the resources that are available. Those are kind of the themes that we've heard when Nick Saban was at helm and now with Kalen DeBoer leading the way. So yeah, obviously it's going to be different. I've had a few prospects admit that to me. It's not going to be the same with Nick Saban not being out there on the football field, but it's as close to similar as you can get for Alabama. And you have to give a lot of credit to DeBoer, Courtney Morgan, all those guys for keeping that culture in place. A couple key coaches, Freddie Roach, Robert Gillespie, they deserve a lot of praise for keeping that going, especially with those relationships. You mentioned London Merritt. He brought up both Gillespie and Roach being retained on the staff as key reasons why Alabama is high in his recruitment. And you see that lead the way for someone like Antonio Coleman to flip back to Alabama from Auburn. So, yeah, you have to give a shout out to those two guys. But, a lot of things have kind of remained similar for Alabama.
Yeah, Tim, it seems like Gillespie, Roach, Shepard, these are kind of the names you hear over and over again at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking, Colin Hitchler. I think he's low key, sneaks into a lot of recruitments. We kind of forget about him because Mo Linquist is kind of a big name coming from a head coaching position. We hear Mo's name. We hear Colin's name. Kane Womack. We hear his name a lot. I'll tell you, the one thing about last week that, like I summed up to my friends, honestly, is the excitement. That's one of the most exciting weeks in Alabama history, right, of us covering this. It was so exciting. Charlie Potter, who's a surgeon, he is an absolute surgeon, clinical surgeon, was excited about going to that practice. Travis Reier flies in for the practice. Jimmy Stein's asking what the hell to wear.
Jimmy looked good.
Should have sent him out there should have sent him out there in the Dumb and Dumber tuxedo and told him that's how we have to dress.
Avoid Christmas. Yeah.
But that's absolutely so. The excitement there was incredible. For the recruiting guys, we were enjoying it too. Obviously we're fans, like to watch the players and the videos and all that. But for us, it was more like along the lines of our job. Kids get offered, kids visit, all that stuff. But to see the excitement from my guys, from you and Charlie, Jimmy, to see the excitement, it was pretty awesome. I was enjoying it.
Charlie is ready, dude.
Charlie
He's always ready.
It out like
he had rosters printed out for Clint and Jimmy and myself, and they were positionally, and he had it dead on. He nailed every guy at every position. There's no doubt Charlie doesn't. Yeah. He doesn't play around much.
And that's what you're looking for. And again, somebody asked me last night on the roundtable to rate a 1 out of 10 where I think Alabama is. I gave it a 10 for where they are compared to where I expected them to be. I gave them an absolute 10. This is I don't know if anybody says they expected more. Your pants are on fire. You know what I mean? You're not telling us the truth, because they've really set this thing up pretty well. You know what I mean?
Homer.
Yeah, Andrew. Are you even at a 10?
Listen, I'm impressed. I'm certainly impressed with what they've been able to do, the excitement that's in the air, from the players on the team to recruits. I didn't think that we were going to see a slew of commitments that were going to happen during the spring. I thought we would see
it's a 10. It's a 10, right? You're calling me a homer. It's a 10.
10. It's a 10. That's what it is.
15. Turn it up and rip the knob off.
I said 10. He called me a homer. Then he said everything I said. So we're leading to a 10.
Hey, they're doing one hell of a job. It's been impressive so far, and I'm excited to see what it turns into, because we hear all this stuff from recruits, and we see the excitement with the players out on the team. Talking to parents of players who are on the team. There's some new life. Not saying that the life had died at Alabama, but I think there was a lot of question marks after Coach DeBoer was hired, because nobody knew him. Nobody knew him. Now everybody's starting to get to know him. They're loving him, and I think it's going to be very beneficial for Alabama here in the future.
You think about it, DeBoer's almost like some of the hires that Nick Saban made when he was at Alabama. There were a lot of guys that Nick Saban hired that a lot of us that think we really know the coaching business went, wow, that's a different one. But Nick Saban was also always quick to point out to him, new blood is a good thing, can be a really good thing. And no one is going to dispute or argue that Nick Saban being in that position of head coach at Alabama was ever going to be a negative thing. But in some ways, change at times can be a good thing for different areas of the program.
Yeah, Kalen DeBoer and Nick Saban will send you scrambling to Google, when they hire somebody. You're double checking how to spell a name. That's what Kalen DeBoer does. He recruits guys and signs guys. You got to really double dip and to figure out how to say and recruit their name. But yeah, they go out there, and I agree with the new blood. You kind of, I think that with this staff, it's a rejuvenated effort. And you remember when Nick Saban got here, it just attacked the SEC, right? Like day one, we're hearing from Lance Thompson, where the hell's the video, all those old school stories that we've got. I think Kalen DeBoer, I think Alabama was such a system. If you're a rival coach in the SEC, I think you could set your calendar by how Alabama was going to go, right? When Nick Saban was going in home, when they were doing officials, when they were doing spring, because we planned vacations around it. In the future, while Nick Saban was here, I think Kalen DeBoer's, like a pitcher being brought up from Venezuela. He's got a slurve ball. He's thrown them He's throwing some stuff that they knew what Nick Saban's fastball is, but this guy's came in with 3 or 4, Ohtani pitches and Darvish pitches. So I think they're going to have to readjust how they attack Alabama, and they will, because it's the SEC. They know how to recruit, but Alabama, with the spring, the way it was set up, they drew first blood. They had a really good week. Georgia starts this week. There's certainly Kirby Smart absolutely knows how to recruit. So we're about to see some dueling banjos. We're about to see some sword fights out here.
And I think the media availability that we've seen with assistant coaches and maybe more players has energized this fan base. There is a level of excitement that I think is due in large part to, hey, I've heard Jamarcus Shepard now a couple times. He's got me ready to run through a wall. Yeah. Same for Coach Cap here most recently. Kane Womack, Freddie Roach, Rob G. Think about all the coaches we've heard from just in a week's period that we never heard from in 17 years under Nick Saban. And again, that worked for Nick. And that's all that's going to matter at the end of the day. All this is well and good, but the W's are what's going to matter. We know that. But in terms of transitioning, I think it's been a big, big positive. And I think, Andrew, it'll show up in the form of probably the A-Day attendance being pretty extensive, pretty massive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think it's probably one of the, if not the most anticipated A-Day that we've seen in the last, since Nick Saban arrived.
Since 2007, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see how packed that stadium is. There's going to be obviously a lot of recruits that are going to be in attendance, but heck, maybe even Tim Watson, I might take a trip down there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're gonna have the airing of we're gonna have Festivus at A-Day. Me and Andrew are gonna air some grievances, take our shirt off, and wrestle in the quad.
There you go. Wow, you talk about a pay-per-view, JoJo. How much you willing to pay the $59.95 for that?
No. Here's how you do that. You make that go into every home, and you pay them $55.99 not to have access to.
Well, we put it here on the
That's
YouTube
how you
channel.
become rich.
I mean,
You're
that's
like,
where we
block this stuff in case your kids skip through this channel. You don't want none of this.
Oh, wow. All right, guys. So again, don't take spring break for a break with us at BamaOnLine.com. No football practice, but man, March Madness continues on. What about Nate Oates and his basketball team as it gets ready for the SEC tournament coming up? And then you got NCAA tournaments and a return to spring football. But again, guys, commitment watch. Andrew said we're always on it. I think there's degrees to that, and I think that degree right now is probably pretty high, right?
Yeah. We had good Friday night nuggets, and then we had good Sunday nuggets that kind of touched on it a little bit more.
Chick-fil-A didn't have nuggets on Sunday, but BOL did.
They do not
put it on a shirt.
That's a good one, Travis. That's a good one.
I wish John Cena would have put on a shirt last night in those Oscars. I don't know how that.
Man, I felt probably a bad way to word that, but
I only watch the highlights now. I have really turned into whatever Joseph's.
It's like, John, this is the only way you're going to get up here to this sort of podium. Is if we bring you out like this. So,
and if I look like that, I'll be honest, that's how I'd go to the mall. You know what I mean? I would just walk to the mall if I look like that. I'll tell you what,
though, WWE keeps winning, man. Rock,
I know the Rock,
Cena.
The Rock's a bad guy. I saw he was like selling it out again.
Oh, yeah, he went heel. We'll say that for another show, though. We'll save that for our WWE BOL podcast. We're
going to spoil it for Joseph, who's got him taped.
Yeah. Well, guys, as always, a lot of great stuff, even more stuff with these three at BamaOnLine.com. Go check it out right now. Join us on the roundtable, the premium message board at BOL. Tim, Andrew, Joseph, thanks again.
See you guys soon.
There they go. Back to the roundtable. You join us right there as well. And again, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel right here, do it right now. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of our YouTube content as it drops right here on the YouTube home for BOL. For Tim, Andrew, and Joseph, till next time, so long, everybody.